On a summer morning in 216 BC, the largest Roman army yet assembled advanced across a dusty plain in southern Italy. Nearly every man in the formation believed numerical weight would finally crush the foreign army that had humiliated Rome twice. Ahead, Hannibal arranged a thinner line whose center curved outward toward the approaching legions like a bow waiting to bend. The Roman infantry struck that curve and drove it backward, step by step, exactly as Roman strength was designed to do. To the men in the front ranks, the enemy center appeared to be breaking beneath pressure that no army could withstand. They pressed deeper, narrowing their own front as thousands behind pushed toward the same apparent opening. On both sides, veteran African infantry remained almost motionless, watching the Roman mass pass between them. Then the Africans turned inward and attacked the exposed Roman flanks with shields, spears, and fresh strength. Behind the legions, Carthaginian cavalry returned from victory on the wings and closed the final road out. The Roman army stopped being a line and became a crowd surrounded by enemies on every face. By afternoon, the greatest force Rome had sent into battle was being destroyed from the outside inward. The First Punic War had ended in 241 BC, with Carthage defeated at sea and forced to surrender Sicily. The peace imposed a heavy indemnity, while a brutal mercenary revolt soon threatened Carthage within its own African territory. Rome then seized Sardinia during Carthage's weakness, deepening resentment among leaders who believed the settlement had become exploitation. Hamilcar Barca rebuilt Carthaginian power in Iberia, where land, silver, soldiers, and alliances could finance recovery. Later tradition says young Hannibal swore never to become a friend of Rome before leaving Africa with his father. Whether literal or shaped by legend, the story preserved how completely his life became attached to the unfinished conflict. After Hamilcar's death, Hasdrubal the Fair expanded Carthaginian influence through diplomacy and founded New Carthage as a strategic capital. When Hasdrubal was assassinated in 221 BC, the army selected Hannibal as commander despite his youth. He consolidated Iberian territory, then besieged Saguntum, a city whose relationship with Rome made conflict increasingly difficult to avoid. After Saguntum fell, Rome demanded Hannibal's surrender. The Carthaginian council refused, and the Second Punic War began. Hannibal chose to carry that war into Italy, where victory might break Rome's alliances faster than any attack across the sea. His army left New Carthage, crossed the Ebro and Pyrenees, and moved toward the Rhone before Rome could block the western route. A Roman army reached Massalia, expecting to intercept him, but Hannibal crossed upstream and continued toward the Alps. The Alpine passage exposed soldiers and animals to cold, landslides, narrow tracks, hunger, and attacks from local communities. The army that descended into Italy was smaller than the one that had left Iberia, but it had survived a shared ordeal. Gallic peoples hostile to Rome supplied recruits, food, intelligence, and a local reason for the invasion to continue. Hannibal's force therefore changed as it marched, combining a Barcid veteran corps with allies who joined inside Italy. His political message was consistent. Rome's allies could recover autonomy by abandoning the Republic after its armies were defeated. Rome's power, however, did not rest only in the city. It rested in roads, colonies, treaties, and communities supplying new armies. Defeating one legion was insufficient if the alliance network simply produced another in the following season. Hannibal therefore needed repeated victories spectacular enough to make continued loyalty appear more dangerous than defection. Cannae would become the most powerful argument he ever delivered to the peoples of Italy. The battle at Cannae did not begin with a single brilliant curve drawn on open ground. It began with Rome's refusal to accept that Hannibal had changed the kind of war being fought in Italy. 2 years earlier, Hannibal had crossed from Iberia, forced an army through the Alps, and entered northern Italy unexpectedly. At the river Ticinus, his cavalry defeated Roman horsemen and demonstrated the speed of the army Rome would have to face. At the Trebia, he drew a larger Roman force through freezing water and attacked it while cold, hungry, and disordered. A hidden detachment led by Mago struck the Roman rear after Hannibal's center fixed the legions in front. The following year, Hannibal marched through the marshes of Etruria, losing an eye but preserving the initiative. At Lake Trasimene, he concealed an army among hills and attacked a Roman column compressed between slope and water. Consul Gaius Flaminius died, thousands of soldiers fell, and another Roman army disappeared before it could form properly. Rome had now seen Hannibal win through cold, concealment, timing, divided ground, and attacks from unexpected directions. The lesson available after Trasimene was clear. Hannibal was most dangerous when Rome accepted the battle he appeared to offer. Panic in Rome produced an extraordinary response: the appointment of Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator. Fabius concluded that Rome should avoid decisive battle, shadow Hannibal, protect allies, and let the invader consume his supplies. The policy required patience from a political culture that treated aggressive courage as proof of public virtue. Hannibal burned farms, seized food, and marched through allied territory, making Roman restraint look like helplessness. Romans mocked Fabius as cunctator, the delayer, because he refused the dramatic confrontation citizens expected. Yet his army remained intact, and Hannibal could neither force it into danger nor remove it from the campaign. When Hannibal entered a valley that seemed blocked, Roman officers believed patience had finally trapped him. Hannibal tied torches to cattle, drove them toward the heights, and used the confusion to move his army through another pass. The escape made Fabius look cautious without result, even though the Roman force still survived. His deputy Minucius later attacked independently, fell into an ambush, and survived only because Fabius intervened. Every episode strengthened the tactical case for delay while weakening its political appeal. Fabius's emergency command ended, and ordinary elections returned the decision to consuls answerable to public pressure. The defeats had killed soldiers, damaged allied confidence, and filled Rome with demands for a victory large enough to restore fear. For 216 BC, Rome elected Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro as consuls. Ancient writers portrayed Paulus as cautious and aristocratic, Varro as reckless and popular, a contrast sharpened by later blame. Both men operated inside a system that expected consuls to share authority and alternate supreme command. That arrangement could work when objectives were agreed, but disagreement changed strategy with the calendar. Rome then mobilized on a scale Hannibal had never faced in one field army. Polybius says 8 Roman legions were combined with an equivalent allied infantry contribution. The standard legion was enlarged, creating an infantry mass commonly estimated near 80,000 men. More than 6,000 cavalry accompanied them, though mounted strength remained inferior to Hannibal's. Rome was not merely replacing losses. It was concentrating enough manpower to end the invasion in one decision. The mobilization drew heavily on Roman citizens and communities bound to Rome through alliance and military obligation. These allied soldiers were not hired auxiliaries standing outside the system. They supplied a major part of Roman battlefield power. Officers organized the infantry into manipular legions built from smaller tactical units, intervals, and supporting lines. In normal deployment, this structure offered flexibility, reinforcement, and room for units to respond to changing pressure. At Cannae, however, the Romans reduced intervals and increased depth, packing far more men behind each point of contact. The decision promised irresistible forward force against a center believed weaker than Rome's own. It also reduced the room available for individual units to turn, separate, or react to threats from the sides. The infantry carried large shields, heavy pila, short swords, helmets, and varying amounts of body armor. Many wealthier soldiers wore chainmail, while others relied on chest plates, shields, and the protection of formation. The cavalry on the Roman right consisted primarily of citizens. Allied Italian horsemen formed the left wing. The army was powerful, experienced, and courageous, but its greatest concentration of strength remained the infantry center. Hannibal's army was smaller and far less uniform, assembled through years of campaigning from different peoples and military traditions. Its African infantry had campaigned with him from Iberia and survived the Alpine crossing and earlier victories in Italy. Many now carried armor and weapons taken from Roman dead, making visual recognition difficult once battle became close. The Iberians carried large shields and distinctive swords, while white tunics edged with color made their units visually striking. Gallic warriors supplied numbers, physical aggression, and intimate knowledge of the Italian north, where many had joined Hannibal. Their equipment and discipline varied, but Hannibal repeatedly used their momentum and willingness to accept heavy casualties. Balearic slingers and other light troops could disrupt formations before heavy infantry made contact. Numidian cavalry fought without heavy armor, using agile horses, javelins, feigned withdrawals, and relentless pursuit. On the opposite wing, heavier Iberian and Gallic cavalry supplied the shock required to defeat Roman horsemen quickly. Hannibal coordinated these different troops through experienced sub-commanders, clear roles, and a plan each formation could actually perform. His army lacked Rome's common system, but its differences became complementary when every contingent attacked the right problem. Years of shared campaigning had taught these contingents how Hannibal used signals, reserves, terrain, and apparent weakness. African officers understood the aggression of Gallic warriors, while Iberian commanders knew how Numidian movement could conceal a flank. Orders still crossed languages, but repeated experience created routines that required fewer explanations during battle. Hannibal also cultivated intelligence through scouts, prisoners, local allies, merchants, and close observation of Roman habits. He knew Rome had enlarged its legions and concentrated unusual depth in the center. That knowledge did not dictate one automatic answer. It revealed where Roman expectations could be encouraged and then punished. The Carthaginian cavalry advantage depended on healthy horses, replacement mounts, fodder, water, and disciplined control after success. Winning a cavalry fight would achieve little if excited riders scattered into pursuit and failed to return. The infantry center likewise needed commanders capable of giving ground without allowing fear to turn movement into flight. Every part of the coming plan used a real strength, but each strength had to arrive within a narrow window of time. Cannae would look geometrically simple only after thousands of human decisions made the geometry real. After wintering near Geronium, Hannibal needed food as urgently as he needed tactical opportunity. An invading army living in hostile territory could not remain concentrated without controlling grain, grazing, roads, and willing communities. When the new campaigning season began, Hannibal moved into Apulia and seized the supply depot at Cannae. The position threatened Roman food collection and challenged the Republic to either respond or surrender productive countryside. Rome's massive new army followed, establishing camps near the Aufidus River within sight of Hannibal. Skirmishes began as soldiers sought water, gathered fodder, tested routes, and measured the enemy's willingness to engage. In one encounter, Roman troops reportedly gained an advantage, encouraging confidence among men already eager for decisive battle. Paulus remained concerned that open ground favored Hannibal's superior cavalry. Varro and many officers believed delay wasted Rome's numerical superiority and prolonged danger to Allied territory. The armies waited close enough that each day's water, dust, wind, and command rotation altered the tactical calculation. Hannibal needed Rome to choose battle on ground, where his cavalry and flexible center could control the result. The Aufidus was not a vast barrier, but it shaped the battlefield, camps, cavalry wings, and possible lines of retreat. One Roman camp held most of the army, while a smaller camp controlled positions on the opposite side of the river. Hannibal shifted his own camp and offered battle, using movement to challenge Roman confidence and complicate access to water. Paulus declined to attack on a day when he held command, judging the offered ground too favorable to enemy horsemen. Hannibal sent Numidians against Roman water carriers, a calculated provocation that made restraint feel humiliating. The next morning, according to the ancient narrative, command passed to Varro. Later, Roman history placed much of the blame on him, though the decision reflected wider pressure for battle across the Republic. He ordered the army out and began deploying on the plain near the river. Pallas opposed the timing, but took his assigned position rather than fracture command before the enemy. The smaller Roman camp was attacked during the wider battle, preventing its troops from easily reinforcing or escaping. By sunrise, political argument had become geometry. Two armies arranging bodies, depth, and movement across the same ground. The traditional date is August 2nd, though converting ancient calendars into modern dates is not entirely secure. Ancient sources describe a hot, dry wind carrying dust toward the Roman line during the battle. The exact battlefield orientation remains debated, but dust, sun, and river all shaped what soldiers could see and how cavalry moved. Rome placed its citizen cavalry on the right near the river, under the command associated with Pallas. The allied cavalry occupied the left under Varro, facing the open plain and the Numidian horse. Between them stood the enormous Roman and allied infantry center, deeper than normal and intended to drive straight ahead. Light infantry deployed in front to screen the heavy formations and begin the battle at missile range. The compressed Roman order traded frontage and maneuver room for concentrated pressure at the chosen point. If Hannibal's center broke, the Romans expected to divide his army before the cavalry wings could decide the field. The plan was direct, understandable, and consistent with an army built around superior heavy infantry numbers. Its danger depended on whether the apparent weakness ahead was genuine. Hannibal placed his Balearic slingers and other light troops in front, matching Rome's screen before the heavy formations met. Near the river on his left, Hasdrubal commanded the heavier Iberian and Gallic cavalry against the Roman citizen horse. On the open right, Numidian riders faced Varro's allied cavalry with room to scatter, return, and pursue. Hannibal divided his veteran African infantry into two bodies positioned back on either side of the center. Between them, Iberian and Gallic infantry formed an outward projecting crescent closer to the Romans. Hannibal and his brother Mago stood with this center, accepting the most dangerous position in the entire design. The center was expected to resist, bend, and retreat without dissolving under the heaviest infantry pressure in the ancient Mediterranean. The Africans had to wait while allies beside them appeared to lose, then wheel inward at the correct moment. Hasdrubal's cavalry had to win quickly enough to influence the infantry battle before Hannibal's center collapsed. The Numidians did not need immediate destruction. They needed to keep allied cavalry occupied and prevent support elsewhere. Hannibal's formation was therefore not a picture. It was a sequence in which every contingent's timing depended on the others. The battle opened with light infantry moving through the dusty space between the armies. Javelins, slingstones, and arrows tested shields and nerves without deciding what the heavy formations would soon attempt. When their ammunition thinned, the skirmishers withdrew through prepared gaps toward the safety of their own lines. Near the river, Hasdrubal launched the Iberian and Gallic cavalry into the Roman citizen horse. The confined space discouraged elegant maneuver and turned the clash into close, brutal fighting among packed horses. Polybius describes men dismounting and fighting on foot, evidence of how completely the two mounted formations became entangled. Superior numbers and aggression gave Hasdrubal's force the advantage, and the Roman cavalry began to collapse. Pallas was injured or unhorsed during the cavalry fighting and moved toward the infantry where the main decision was forming. Across the field, Numidian cavalry swarmed around the allied horse without committing to one fixed collision. Their mobile contest prevented Varro's wing from helping the Roman right or attacking Hannibal's infantry flank. Then the Roman heavy infantry lowered its pila and advanced toward the curved center. The first impact fell on Iberians and Gauls standing forward of the African wings. Hannibal's center fought hard enough to preserve belief that it intended to hold the original line. The Gauls and Iberians suffered heavily, but their formation yielded in sections rather than disappearing at once. Roman front ranks sensed movement and increased pressure, encouraged by thousands of men pushing behind them. The outward curve flattened, then bent inward under the weight of the advance. What looked like collapse drew the deepest Roman columns toward the center and away from their cavalry wings. Intervals between maniples narrowed as units followed the same opening and lost the space required for independent movement. Hannibal remained near the center, where his presence helped convert retreat into controlled resistance. The African infantry still had not entered the main fight and remained fresh on ground the Romans were passing. Even Roman soldiers far behind continued marching forward, unaware that the geometry ahead had already changed. When the crescent became a pocket, Hannibal had created the opportunity, but the two African wings still had to close it. The African infantry on Hannibal's right faced left and attacked the exposed side of the Roman advance. On the opposite flank, the second African body performed the same movement in reverse. Roman units nearest the attacks tried to turn, but their neighbors and rear ranks occupied the space required to maneuver. The extraordinary depth that had strengthened the advance now transmitted pressure inward from every threatened edge. At the front, many soldiers continued pushing against Gauls and Iberians because they could not see the flanking crisis behind them. At the sides, tired legionaries faced fresh veterans equipped for close combat and attacking from unexpected directions. Captured Roman shields and armor may have added confusion, but alignment and direction revealed who was attacking whom. The Africans did not complete a perfect circle in one instant. They created two hard walls that stopped lateral escape. The river, cavalry battles, dust, and dense formation had already made withdrawal toward the original line extraordinarily difficult. Roman officers now faced contradictory needs: maintain pressure ahead, resist both flanks, and recover room that no longer existed. Hannibal's weakened center stabilized once Roman momentum was absorbed by attacks from both sides. Hasdrubal completed the destruction of the Roman citizen cavalry near the river before the infantry battle reached its crisis. Instead of pursuing every fugitive, he gathered riders and moved across the rear of the Roman infantry. This decision converted victory on one wing into influence over the entire battlefield. The Allied cavalry under Varro was still occupied by Numidians, whose attacks denied a stable target. Hasdrubal struck them from behind or flank, and the Allied cavalry finally broke from the field. The Numidians pursued the fugitives, ensuring that few mounted troops could return to help the infantry. Hasdrubal again resisted the temptation of a long pursuit and turned his heavy squadrons back toward the legions. The movement reveals why cavalry superiority mattered as more than a count of horses at the beginning. Hannibal's horsemen won locally, preserved cohesion, and repeatedly applied force where the next decision required it. Pallas remained among the infantry, while Varro escaped with mounted survivors toward Venusia. When Hasdrubal's squadrons reached the Roman rear, the double envelopment became complete. The trapped Romans could now face enemies in every direction, but the formation had never been designed to create four simultaneous fronts. Men on the outer edges fought desperately, while thousands nearer the center could barely reach an opponent. The deeper the formation had become, the larger the number of soldiers trapped without room to use weapons. Dust reduced visibility to a few bodies, severing the connection between orders, standards, and the actual shape of the battle. The sound inside the pocket offered no clear information. Metal, shouting, hooves, wounded animals, and pressure from unseen ranks. Summer heat and exhaustion consumed men who had already marched, advanced, and fought before the circle closed. Some tried to climb over bodies or force paths inward, movements that increased crushing pressure on their own comrades. Officers could command only the men close enough to hear, and even correct orders could not create physical space. Standards that normally guided units became fixed points inside a crowd whose original units had merged together. The surrounding line contracted as outer Roman ranks fell, and Carthaginian troops stepped over the ground they had held. Cannae was not a single collision followed by flight. It was an enclosure followed by hours of controlled destruction. African infantry pressed from the flanks, while Iberians and surviving Gauls held the front and cavalry attacked openings from behind. The Gauls had paid a severe price in the bending centre, where their losses formed much of Hannibal's dead. Their sacrifice had not been accidental waste. It purchased the depth and time required for the wings to close. Roman soldiers continued to fight with the discipline and courage that had built the Republic's military reputation. Their courage could preserve a local circle for minutes, but it could not reopen cavalry routes or move the surrounding army. Polybius says the outer files were continually cut down until the contracted formation disappeared where it stood. He gives Roman deaths near 70,000, while Livy offers lower totals and other categories of prisoners and escapees. Exact numbers remain debated, because ancient casualty reports served memory, blame, and the scale of the moral lesson. Even the lower estimates describe one of the deadliest single days suffered by any army of the ancient Mediterranean. Hannibal lost several thousand men, especially among the Gauls and Iberians who absorbed the Roman advance. The exchange was so unequal that numbers alone became part of Cannae's enduring shock. Paulus had been wounded and remained inside the infantry struggle as the chance of organized escape disappeared. Livy later pictured a military tribune offering him a horse and begging him to save himself for Rome. In that moralized account, Paulus refused to abandon the soldiers and sent a final warning back to the city. Polybius gives less theatrical detail, but agrees that the consul died fighting near the center. 2 former consuls, numerous senior magistrates, and many senators serving in the army also died. Varro reached Venusia with a small mounted group and began collecting survivors rather than disappearing from public life. Several thousand men escaped toward nearby towns, often because they were outside the completed pocket or broke through early. Troops left guarding the larger Roman camp attempted resistance, but were eventually captured when Hannibal turned against them. At Canusium, local residents received fugitives and helped preserve the fragment of command that remained. A young Publius Cornelius Scipio was among the surviving officers later associated with preventing despair and desertion. The future victor over Hannibal emerged from Cannae not as a conqueror, but as one survivor among a broken generation. Polybius records about 5,700 deaths in Hannibal's army, a fraction of Roman losses, but still a significant cost. The victors collected armor, weapons, horses, standards, and the personal possessions of an entire consular army. Livy describes baskets of gold rings taken from Roman nobles and poured before the Carthaginian Senate. Thousands of prisoners were divided by status, guarded for ransom, or absorbed into the human economy of war. Livy also preserves Hannibal's famous claim that Hannibal could dine on the capital within days if he marched immediately. The conversation may be literary because Polybius does not record it, and later writers shaped Cannae around missed opportunity. Hannibal did not march directly on Rome, a city hundreds of kilometers away behind walls, reserves, and uncertain supply. His army had fought for hours, suffered losses, and lacked the heavy siege system required for a quick assault on the capital. Leaving southern allies and supplies behind for a symbolic rush could turn victory into isolation before Roman walls. Hannibal's strategic method sought to break Rome's alliance network, not necessarily batter the city into immediate surrender. Cannae gave that political strategy its greatest opportunity, but opportunity was not the same as final success. When reliable news reached Rome, disbelief gave way to mourning, panic, and fear that Hannibal would soon appear outside the gates. The Senate restricted public mourning, guarded roads, and gathered information before rumor could dissolve civic order. Fabius advised calm, disciplined worship and practical preparation rather than the surrender of judgment to fear. Rome appointed new commanders, armed younger recruits, accepted volunteers, and purchased enslaved men for military service. The Republic lowered normal standards because the field army that enforced those standards no longer existed. The Senate refused to ransom many captured soldiers, sending a harsh message that surrender would not transfer its cost to the state. Survivors from the defeated legions were later assigned prolonged service in Sicily, carrying the stigma of catastrophe. Varro returned to Rome and was thanked for not despairing of the Republic, despite the blame later attached to his battle decision. The response mattered because Hannibal's victory assumed that military destruction would produce political collapse. Rome instead converted grief into new levies, tighter control, and a refusal to negotiate peace. The army at Cannae had been surrounded. The Republic beyond it had not. The victory nevertheless transformed southern Italy and convinced several communities that Roman power might finally be broken. Capua, one of Italy's richest cities, defected and offered Hannibal an important political and logistical base. Other peoples and cities in the south followed, while many Latin colonies and central Italian allies remained with Rome. The alliance network bent, but did not collapse in the complete sequence Hannibal required. Carthage sent support, yet not enough to transform Hannibal's battlefield mastery into unlimited manpower and siege capacity. Philip V of Macedon allied with Hannibal, forcing Rome to manage another theatre across the Adriatic. Rome answered by avoiding another Cannae, containing Hannibal, attacking his allies, and sustaining war across several fronts. In Iberia, Roman campaigns targeted the territory, money, and recruitment network supporting the Barcid war effort. The young Scipio eventually captured New Carthage, defeated Carthaginian armies, and carried the war into North Africa. Hannibal was recalled from Italy and defeated at Zama in 202 BC, 14 years after his masterpiece at Cannae. The tactical victor of 216 had proved unable to make one perfect battlefield decision and a resilient political war. Our fullest early account comes from Polybius, writing decades later and connected closely to the family of Scipio Aemilianus. He valued eyewitness inquiry and military explanation, but his access and loyalties still shaped the history he preserved. Livy wrote later still, adding speeches, moral contrasts, omens, and memorable scenes that require careful separation from secure events. Army totals, casualties, battlefield orientation, and responsibility between the consuls remain subjects of continuing debate. The central sequence is firmer: Roman depth, a yielding center, African flank attacks, cavalry victory, and closure from the rear. Calling it a simple weak center trick understates the discipline required from troops who had to bend without breaking. It also understates cavalry commanders who won twice, ignored tempting pursuits, and returned at the decisive place. Later, strategists made Cannae a model of double envelopment, including modern officers seeking decisive battles of annihilation. Yet copying the outer shape cannot reproduce intelligence, morale, timing, terrain, and trust between different formations. Rome's deepest lesson was not how to escape the circle, but how to survive politically after the circle had closed. Hannibal destroyed Rome's largest army by turning its greatest strength into pressure that carried every legion farther inside his design.